Good morning, good afternoon, and for those of you joining us across the pond, good evening, and welcome to another Hubinar here at Nonprofit Hub. I'm Randy Hawthorne, your host today. I have with us Jamie Nodder, who is going to be talking to us about employee engagement, something that I think we all have struggles with over time. So I can't wait to hear what Jamie has to say about that. But while we're waiting for all of you to sign up and get online and get all comfortable, I just wanted to let you know a few things. First of all, this webinar will be recorded. Yes, we indeed are recording this webinar. In case you want to hear this again, we will be recording this webinar. So just wait for the recording. We'll send you a link after this, probably a little later today, so that you can share this with your friends, because I'm sure it will be that good that you will want to do so. And I believe that's all I have today as far as of announcements. So Jamie, how are you doing today?
I'm in good shape. How are you?
Great. You were telling me just before that this will be a book in November.
Yes, yeah, the book will be coming out in November. It is literally titled The Non-Obvious Guide to Improving Employee Engagement. It's actually part of a guidebook series that our publisher is with, and they test us to write about employee engagement. So
okay, awesome. That is awesome to hear. Well, I don't want to take up any of your time, so Jamie, I'm just going to hand it right on over to you and let you get started.
Awesome. Well, I am excited. Thank you for having me, of course. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I think you're right. I think a lot of people are worried about employee engagement. They want to improve employee engagement. It's definitely a popular topic in the business world, but as we're going to talk about today, I think I'm going to try and make the case that it's really ripe for a non-obvious approach, because we've been talking about employee engagement for 10 or 15 years. We've been complaining that it costs us billions of dollars. We've been spending, in the business world anyway, overall, billions of dollars trying to fix it, and we're not improving anything. Like, the numbers don't change. So if anything was ripe for a new approach, I think it would be employee engagement. So that's what I want to talk about today. And of the conversation should be a little bit of an exploration into the problem, okay? And there's a book I have on my desk that I read recently. It's literally called The Crisis of Disengagement. And there's some logic to this. There's some data behind this. But to explain this crisis of disengagement, you'll have to indulge me, because I would rather start with a metaphor and start by talking about this Lamborghini, okay? So this is a Lamborghini, a 2018 Lamborghini. It costs, oh, I love how the marketing people do this. It starts at $199,800. So it's not even $200,000, it's less, right? So it's $200,000 to buy this car, has a V10 engine, puts out something ridiculous like 640 horsepower. I think it gets up all of 14 miles to gallon city. Why you drive this car in the city is another story, but this is an amazing car. And here's the deal. Imagine you went out and actually spent $200,000 in this car, and you're driving home and you're expecting it to be our Lamborghini, but you're driving it, it's like, it's not going fast. There's no pickup. It's like driving a Honda Civic, and you're like, this is horrible. And you actually open the engine, you open the hood, and you look at the engine, and that 10-cylinder engine, you discover 3 of those cylinders are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. They're going up and down, they're firing, they're moving the drive shaft, like it's all good. They're perfectly normal cylinders, they're working great. 5 of them, half of them, are kind of going up and down, but maybe not at the right order. They don't seem to be moving the needle, right? Like, they're not actually helping you go much faster. They're sort of working, but not like really making a difference, right? And then 2 of the cylinders, you realize, are not even going up and down at all. And not only that, they're oozing this like sludge into the rest of the engine, right? So they're actually probably one of the reasons why those 5 are not really making a difference. Now, if you spend $200,000 on a car and that was the shape of the engine, you'd get your money back, or you get a new car or whatever, but you wouldn't just accept it. But in the world of leadership and management and employee engagement, that's kind of what we're doing, is saying, well, you know, that's just the way the engine is, and it's the best we can do, and we should move along with it. Because in the employee engagement world, and this is long-standing research, we've been doing this for a long time, roughly 30% of employees are considered engaged at work. 3 out of 10, those are those 3 cylinders that are working, right? And they like their work, they're engaged, they're interested, they're giving discretionary effort, which is often a big piece of defining what engagement is, right? And you've either been one of these employees or you've seen them around the office. They like it, they're producing. These are your producers, right? But it's only 3 out of 10, right? 50% are kind of going through the motions, they're working, but they're doing sort of the bare minimum. And then 20%, 2 out of 10, 1 out of 5, if you want to think about that, go out and where your friends you in the work, one of you actually may be actively disengaged. This is, not only do you not like your workplace, you are intentionally sabotaging it. Like that, I'm not making these words up. These are the definitions from Gallup, the people that do the research out there. You are actually intentionally making your organization worse. 20% of the workforce. And again, I use the Lamborghini metaphor just to say if a car was not performing, if you were spending that much money in a car and 2 out of 10 cylinders aren't working, you'd return it immediately. You'd take action. But with 20% of our workforce actively disengaged, this has been true for 15 years, according to the researchers. And this is true right now again, on average, not necessarily your organization, but on average, this is what we're experiencing, and we are not fixing it. We are accepting it as this is just the way it is. And as you might imagine, there's also plenty of data saying that this is a really big problem. From the book, Disengagement, this is the number they throw out. I think there's plenty of numbers out there that are similar. But $500 billion in lost productivity annually. I think that's just in the United States. Now, you have to take these numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt because they're measuring, it's kind of a hypothetical measurement, right? It's like, well, if everyone were totally engaged, we would be producing this much, et cetera, et cetera. But to be honest, even if they're off by 100 billion, this is still a big number. We are still losing potential. We are operating at a fraction of the possibility because we do not create workplaces where everyone can be engaged. Okay. Now, all of this is sort of the background. This is the problem. We've known this is a problem for a long time. And as I said at the beginning, we've been trying to do things about this. Like we've been trying to fix this. I think the last number I saw from Burson by Deloitte was maybe $800 million a year in the United States is spent on employee engagement surveys and employee engagement programs. Although this, sort of begs the question, like if we can afford to spend $800 million a year or close to $1 billion a year and see no visible improvement over a period of 15 years, like what's that all about? How is it that we're working this hard, right? And not seeing results? So my answer to that is because we're sort of taking the obvious approach to engagement. We're not embracing a different view. We're not challenging, I think, the status quo about what it is we're trying to fix. And we're falling into some sort of dangerous patterns, actually, that keep us doing the same thing over and over again without getting different results, right? Which is sort of the definition of insanity. So I think where we have to start then for a non-obvious approach to really do things differently is to go to the definition of engagement. And if you Google this, it's one of those cases where every consultant has their own definition. But having done that research and having looked at it, I do find that there's some commonalities. I think most of the definitions of employee engagement revolve around this concept of an emotional commitment or connection that an employee has to the organization, right? So an engaged employee has this connection, right? They're committed. It's not like passive, like, I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to punch in, punch out, but I don't care. There has to be this increased level of emotional commitment or connection to the organization, its goals, its mission, what it's doing, that kind of thing. And this, I think, makes intuitive sense, right? Like, again, we've all either been that person or seen people in the office that are like that. They do care. That does make a difference. That they end up producing more and being more productive. Like, and you look around like, why can't we all be like Bob, who's so like emotionally committed? Like, we want more people who have this level of emotional commitment. The huge challenge though is like, well then how do you get that? Because here's the deal, you don't control my level of emotional commitment or connection to the organization. That's internal to me. It's very difficult for you as an organization to like do things or pull levers that are going to move that needle. I mean, there may be things that you do that will move that needle, but it's not a direct cause and effect thing. Like you can't just say, I'm going to send out more newsletters and therefore your emotional commitment's going to go up, right? And we've actually created our own problem here by defining it. We define employee engagement in a way that we can't fix. Like we can't do that. That emotional commitment or connection is a result of something. It's a result of a lot of things, but it's not a thing that we can move and shift and change, right, directly. And so our first and a non-obvious light on employee engagement was to really try and identify, all right, okay, it is about emotional commitment or connection, but what is it that drives that? Because if we can find out what drives that as something that we can actually get our hands around and change, then we're in better shape. And the key distinguishing factor around that we identified is about success. Okay, so our definition of employee engagement is that it is a level of emotional commitment or connection that an employee has towards the workplace. But that level of commitment and connection is driven by how successful they are at work, both personally and organizationally. Employee engagement happens, it's a result. It happens when the people who are working there can be successful. So when I can be successful to me personally, right, based on my own career goals, on my own destiny, on my own approach, but also successful in my role means something, and that what I'm doing in the organization is actually helping to drive the success of the organization. Like if I'm working at stuff and it's not, and it's really not helping the organization succeed, that's a key way to reduce my level of engagement, because I'm like, why am I even doing this, right? But when you can create a system where more people in the organization can consistently be successful, you will end up with that result, which is the higher engagement. But in fact, we actually don't do that in organizations. Like we say we want that, but then again, I'm in a role and I like it and I want to do this work, but you know, I got all this red tape I got to climb through in order to get the resources I need. That hurts me from being successful. Or I'm really good at my job and doing what I love, but you know, you're like Kodak and you're ignoring the digital camera revolution. And so like, even no matter how hard I work, we're not going to be successful. When you take out the success angle, engagement goes down. Has been missing from all of our employee engagement work. If you actually focused on making people more successful, you're going to get that result of engagement. Now, that then begs the question, okay, well then how do we do that? Like what does it mean to in an organizational context for us, we as employees, to be individually successful and contribute to the success of the enterprise, and what drives the success of the enterprise? So there's two questions that we really need to dig into on that. One is, okay, what is success for your organization? And then two is sort of how do we make that happen? How do we create an environment where more people can be successful? Now, on the what piece, I don't know if this is going to disappoint you, but there is no answer to that, or there are millions of answers to that. Every organization's success driver is unique. I mean, there are certain, you can always argue there are certain things that are consistent, like customer service, good implementation of our plans, whatever. Like you can come up with some really boring baseline stuff, but that's not it, or at least that's not what I'm talking about when it comes to success. The non-obvious angle on success is you got to find out what your superpower is, right? You got to find out what drives your success in your environment with your stakeholders based on the services you provide, right? It's not about copying anything else. I put Zappos and Netflix up on the screen because they're a little overexposed actually in the culture world, but they're sort of the cool kids of workplace culture, right? They're like, oh, Zappos are so awesome, we should be like them. Here's the deal. Zappos knows that for them to be successful, they have to give their people incredible freedom to serve the needs of and solve the problems of customers. Like that's hugely important to them. They're sort of famous for that. They train all of their employees in customer service. I think one person, customer service rep, spent 11 hours on the phone with one customer. I think that's the record. Like they're known for that. Specifically works for them. They determined strategically that was the only way they were going to grow, was to blow people away with customer service. So that's what drives success for them. Netflix, on the other hand, also gets written about. I don't know if you've seen their culture slide deck that's on the internet. It's on SlideShare. It's been viewed millions of times. But they are noted as a really strong culture, a very successful organization. But their stuff is not about customer service. I mean, I'm sure they do customer service, but their superpower, what drives their success is, and this is in their culture deck. It's like a rigorous commitment to excellence. Like one of my favorite quotes on their culture slide deck is we reward average performance with a generous severance package, right? So like if you're good at Netflix, you get fired. You have to be exceptional. You have to be A game. Like again, I don't know all the details of Netflix and their that's what makes them successful. And then on a nonprofit side, one of the organizations we studied for our previous book, When Millennials Take Over, is QLI, and they're a healthcare company. Their model is different. What makes them successful is actually having a very fluid and flexible hierarchy. Like the decision making and who gets voice in the decision making process is based partially on hierarchy and expertise, but also partially on how deeply do you know the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the patient. Okay, and they do sort of brain injury recovery, and so like this is really hard work. If you don't have that personal connection, it's hard for the work to be successful. So they created an organization that enables that. It enables their people, their employees, to behave in ways that generate success both for them and obviously for the patients, right? So I share these stories to say you all better figure out what drives your success. Okay, and it is not about we have an important mission, so we raise good money, we're going to be successful. No, you gotta drill down and say exactly what it is, because when you figure that out, you can then align your organization around that. And that actually gets us to the sort of second question. This is the what drives your success piece, which is going to be unique to you. But the how you achieve that, here is another sort of big non-obvious pivot point for us. It's not about strategy. It's not about even directly about sort of getting the right people on the bus and all that kind of thing. Fundamentally, the way you drive success, the way you galvanize behavior to around your success drivers and your superpowers is by creating a workplace culture that does that. Based on our research, we have come to the conclusion that culture is what drives success ultimately, when you can align that with your success drivers, sort of employee engagement. When you create a workplace culture, and I don't have time today to do my whole what is culture webinar, but the short version is like, look, culture is about what's valued inside your organization. You make it really clear. Some things are valued, other things aren't. That's going to then drive behavior, okay? And so as you drive behavior inside your organization, you have a really important choice to make. Do I create a culture that very specifically drives the behaviors that I know make people successful, or do I ignore that? Most people, frankly, ignore that and let their culture evolve organically, which is not a smart choice in my opinion. If you intentionally shape your culture and align it with the behaviors that make you successful, not only do you get better results, but lo and behold, since you've made everyone in your organization more successful, you actually increase employee engagement, because you've created an environment where people are successful in what they do, and that generates that commitment and that connection. So as much as we say we have a crisis, I view that employee engagement is actually a lagging indicator of culture. The stronger and more aligned which is probably a better word than stronger. The more aligned your culture is with what drives success, the greater your employee engagement is going to be. And you get that result of engagement without ever trying to fix engagement. You know what I mean? What you fix is the culture, and the engagement happens on its own. So if you're buy, as I say with all my presentations, you don't have to buy everything I'm saying today, but at least rent it. Like, consider this idea. So if this stuff is true, that in fact we need to figure out what drives our success and then create a culture that aligns around it, that's going to drive engagement, then we need to kind of shift our approach around metrics. Because as I mentioned earlier, we spend millions and millions of dollars every year on engagement surveys and the programs around them. Engagement surveys, and I do think some of the data they provide is useful. I think fundamentally we're wasting a lot of money on this, because the engagement metric part of it is what I call symptom metrics, right? When you measure engagement, you're asking your people, hey, do you like it here? Are you connected? Do you have this commitment? And you'll get a number on a certain scale, and it's most of the engagement surveys are going to give you green, yellow, or red. You want to be green, you don't want to be red, right? Well, let's say you are red. Well, that's data, but what you've measured is a symptom. You've measured an outcome. People are not happy there. They're not as engaged as you want. But that's kind of like measuring your body temperature, right? You get 101.3, that's a fever. That's definitely a problem, but you have no idea what caused it. And gathering more detailed symptom metrics doesn't help. Like, I don't need to know if your temperature on your kneecap is the same as on your elbow. Like, and that's what we end up doing with our instruments. We're doubling down on getting more and more nuanced symptom metrics. It's not helping us solve the problem. So my advice is simplify the symptom metrics. Ask a couple of questions a couple of times a year on sentiment and whether people are engaged and committed and happy with their workplace. That's useful data to have, but keep it real simple. And then double down on understanding the causes, okay? Find some different ways to gather both quantitative and qualitative data inside your organization to see where your culture is misaligned with what drives your success, because that's the cause, right? So that means we have to do a much better job at understanding culture. And you're going to have to come up with a model, right? You're going to have to, a model that digs deep, that's beyond like, do I like this culture or not like it? Like, you got to describe, hey, what is our culture? How does it work? How do we do things here? That has to be described on a very detailed basis. Now, this is the model that we use. You don't have to use this one. It's not the point. The model that says exactly what is it like to work here. Okay, so we came up with these culture markers: agility, collaboration, growth, etc. These are not new terms, obviously, but we do believe these are useful terms in documenting exactly what it's like to work someplace. Like, people want to know, like, and it's not about good or bad, right? It's not, hey, are we good at innovation? Are we bad at innovation? It's about, how do we do innovation here? Like, do we run experiments? Do we let people hack things? Do we value creativity? Like, what is it? Same with agility, collaboration. Like, is change easy or is it really hard? If something's not working, can we fix it? Or does that require like 29 steps and 37 approvals, right? One side of that equation, the 37 approval side, is kind of the traditional management way of doing things. If you're more like future of work organizations like QLI, the organization we studied for the book, then you can probably move a lot faster. You're more agile. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's useful to know, where do you stand? Are we really traditional or are we more futurist? Actually, I go on and on about how one is not better than the other. If you think about innovation, a lot of people say, hey, we need to really be more innovative, particularly in the nonprofit community. We got to embrace innovation. It's really important. You know, I tell people all the time, hey, if you're a nuclear power plant, I don't want you to be innovative, right? I don't want you hacking things. I don't want you experimenting. So I actually think it's really important that we not take a blanket, we need to be good at this approach. I think we should, again, drill down and say, what's going to drive our success? And maybe that is going to require more innovation, but I want us to have that conversation. So I think you need to be able to answer questions about what it's like to work someplace at your organization in terms like these. But again, you're not just saying, oh yeah, we're good at innovation. We love that. We're all about innovation here. Like, that's not good enough. You got to go one layer down. And I'll looks like some data from an organization that we worked with, specifically within innovation. That's a nonprofit, and the innovation part of your culture, actually, you can break it down into different building blocks. So these are the 8 building blocks of innovation. So there's creativity. I mentioned a few earlier. There's creativity, inspiration, permission to hack, future focus, et cetera, et cetera. These are how your people experience the work around innovation. And the scale here, the numbers on the scale is just from the assessment we use, but the lower numbers, 3.7 on testing new ideas, that's about beta testing. That just means they're more traditional around that. And the higher number means more futurist. So in this particular case, things like creativity and inspiration, the employees at this nonprofit were saying, yeah, those are really present here. We've really valued creativity. I get to be creative in doing my work. That's common. We're doing inspirational work. To score futurist on that means those things are very present in their culture. Whereas testing new ideas and to some extent experimentation and risk-taking, those are not as present. Certainly the testing new ideas, that beta test, that like this particular group does not beta test. They do not take an unfinished piece of their work and share it with their stakeholders to get feedback. That's just not, I mean, maybe a little bit, but not much. As I said, it doesn't mean that's good or bad, but the reason you need to get down to this level, this is also part of the non-obvious thing, is you got to see your patterns around this. You got to see, it's not just good enough to know that we do beta test or not. You got to understand what is it in our culture that might be getting in the way of our success. So when we shared this data with the organization, I had to point out, I'm like, hey, I see the high scores on what I call the conceptual side of innovation, right? So we work, continuous improvement. I could probably put future focus in with that group as well. Like, we're focused in the future, not in the past. Those are concepts, and in this particular culture, those are really common. They're present in the culture. They embrace those ideas, which is great. But that's in contrast, fairly significant contrast to the action side of innovation, right? Do we take risks? Is failure okay? When we ask that question, we got a 6.6, which is different than a 7.7 or 8.4. It's there, but not as much. Same with experimentation. Do we actually create containers within which people can run experiments? And again, beta testing. Do we do beta testing internally and externally? And in this particular culture, it's not as valued. Now, that was a challenge to this organization to say, is that going to cut it? Based on what our stakeholders are asking us to do in our community, are we going to be as successful as we could be if we are and the actions and kind of the infrastructure to support them? And their particular answer to that was, no, this is a concern for us. This particular organization, their stakeholders had actually very high expectations around innovation. Like, we need you to lead the innovation here, right? And here's an aside, my definition of innovation is change that unlocks new value, right? So we need you to help us unlock value that we can't reach. And you can't unlock the value on the concepts alone. You have to try things. You have to take risks. You have to act. So in their particular case, they saw this as, this is a challenge for us. This is something that is getting in the way of our people being successful in our context, which then gives them an opportunity to try and fix those things, align their culture more effectively with what drives success, which would then improve their engagement. And even to take it down sort of one more level, I also pointed out to them, I'm like, hey, before I just want to point out that those risk-taking, experimentation, testing new ideas were a little bit lower. Permission to hack was a little bit higher. That's also an action-oriented one, right? And I sort of was like, well, what's up with that? And the CEO said, oh, I can tell you exactly now that I see this data. Permission to hack, That's like, if I want to change something, my manager, like on a process, my manager will back me up, right? If I'm going to hack something. They said hacking is something you can do by yourself. Hacking you can do in your individual work stream. But experiments and beta tests and real risk taking, that's going to involve other people, and we're not good at that. We became, and this was all unintentional, but they became good at innovation as long as it was sort of secret or within your individual work stream. And again, they decided that's not good enough. We need to fix that. So once they make that decision, then we move on to the next challenge, which is culture change, right? Like they got really clear about some of the building blocks of their culture and how the patterns within them were inhibiting success. The way out of that is to change culture. And I do get a lot of pushback when I tell people they have to change culture. Oh, it's too hard and it takes too long. I had one CEO that said it takes a minimum of 8 years to change culture. For the record, it does not take 8 years to change culture. I have seen cultures been radically transformed in 1 year. Okay, it does happen. Granted, that organization had to fire all of their management team. So I'm not saying it's easy, and if you want to take 8 years, that's your prerogative, but it doesn't have to. But to introduce a non-obvious concept on this, you know what? You don't have to have a huge 5-year, 8-year culture change plan with a change management support and buying everybody who moved my cheese. Like, you don't need that. All you need is a playbook, okay? All you need is a list of plays that you're gonna run that are gonna move the ball forward, to continue with my boring sports metaphor, okay? And moving the ball forward on aligning your culture with what drives success. Some of them aren't going to work, and you're going to swap it out and you're going to try a new play. Some of your plays are going to be really big and long, maybe expensive. Some of them are going to be short and quick and easy wins. That's all good, but you need a list of plays. If you develop a list of plays and then start running them, you're going to move the culture, you're going to align it with success, and you're going to get the engagement. But people feel sort of constrained, like, oh no, I have to come up with this whole plan. Like, you don't need an entire plan. It helps to have some guiding principles, but develop those and then write some plays. This is sort of our rough structure for a culture playbook. Like, you don't have to have plays in each of these areas, but it's common. So like that top level is more about, I don't know, supporting your culture work. So you're going to probably run some plays within rituals and artifacts. If you really care about innovation, you might want to create some artifacts that you share around the organization that make it visible that this is valued. Those are fairly low impact, but they're also easy to do. Maybe change some of your internal rituals and the way what you celebrate, what you don't celebrate. Those are good ways to make it clear that this shift that you want is valued internally. Stewardship are plays that are around supporting culture work in general. So do you have a team of people that is actually paying attention to your culture work and maybe measuring whether you're making progress and that kind of thing? Those are useful plays. And certainly talent and HR, anything that revolves around hiring people or onboarding them or monitoring or measuring their performance, all of that stuff, you got to weave culture into that, because if you don't, you're gonna lose the gains you make. So there's gonna be some talent HR plays too, but it's also just changing the way you do things, changing your processes, right? Changing your staff meetings, changing the way you do budgeting. There's a million processes that you could change that would shift the culture in the direction you need it to go. Same with structure and design. That's about organizational structure and authority and that kind of stuff, but also about your workplace. How you design your workplace. Is it more collaborative? Are you off in offices? Like, there's no one right answer to that, but and then technology in this day and age, there's always technology tools you can use that will move the needle on culture. So I'll give you a couple examples, and I'm going to tie these examples back to the data that I showed you a minute ago. So if you're that organization, that nonprofit that needs to bolster their innovation efforts by improving the action piece, it's like we need to create a culture where more people are doing more experiments, right? So how would you do that? Well, one play in the process bucket would be to introduce some experiment metrics, right? I'm assuming everyone out there has an organization, and I'm assuming you have some kind of dashboard, some kind of metrics that get shared and discussed on a monthly or quarterly basis, right? I mean, it can be about service delivery or basic financial stuff, whatever. You got to have something. If you don't have anything, I'm actually a little worried about you. So you develop some metrics, but then if you need more experiments, then add experiment to your dashboard. Like, that's a real simple process change. Instead of just saying how many stakeholders did we serve, or what was how many new registrants to the conference, whatever it is, add a number that managers have to report up on a monthly or quarterly basis. How many experiments did you run, and what percent failed? 2 numbers. Doesn't take much to pull those together. But I guarantee you, if you've got departments that month in, month out are putting zeros on the board, someone's going to go talk to them and saying, why aren't you doing more experiments? Or if you see people that are putting experiments up there, but the failure rate is 0, that needs a conversation too. Because if all your experiments succeed, you're not doing them right. Okay, some of them have to fail. Otherwise, basically, you're doing stuff you already know how to do. This is not a good experiment. And so the simple act of changing a process, changing what numbers you put on your dashboard, is actually going to generate some behavior that's going to move the needle on experiments. You may not revolutionize the number of experiments you do, but it's going to and so again, some of these can be real simple changes that will end up resulting in behavior change that will drive success. In the technology bucket, if you were focused on innovation and action around that, there are plenty of software packages you can get as an organization that will allow you to give you space internally where everyone in your organization can suggest ideas for improvements or innovations. You can actually use this externally with your stakeholders as well, but even if you just focused internally, if you've got this culture where everyone does their innovation within their own work stream, what if you put it out to everybody? Anyone can suggest some innovative ways or ideas for changing things internally in any department. And the way the software works is there's one that I know of called Idea Scale. You put in ideas and people can comment on the ideas and give feedback on them, but also they vote them up or down, right? So what happens is you crowdsource the prioritization of all these ideas by letting them vote up and down, and suddenly you've got people now working together on stuff and maybe developing some experiments or some beta tests based on it, because those would have stayed hidden in individual work streams before. This is a few years old, but Starbucks actually used to use this with their customers, and they used the voting up and down to decide which ideas to pursue. And even those little green stoppers that you put in the cups, that was a customer idea, not a Starbucks staff idea. And if you're worried, like, I don't want all these ideas to break loose, we can't do them all, you're allowed to say no. I mean, this is idea management. This is not implementation. Someone can come up with a really wonderful, beautiful idea that is completely too expensive to implement, and you have to say, we can't pull it off. We're going to put it aside. But it actually could inspire some other ideas that are easier to implement. So getting them out there is a piece. So this is a technology play you could use that would improve innovation. And then last, I'll give you a talent HR. You could give your people more time to do innovation. Now, I put 20% time up there. That's a classic program from Google from a few years ago. They didn't invent it, frankly, but they got a lot of attention for it. And it was literally giving their employees 20% of their time to work on anything they wanted. So 80% you're working on your core business, 20% you're working on anything you want, any project you want. You don't have to get approval for it. I gotta be honest, I share this story with people and they tend to freak out, particularly the leaders, the CEOs. They're like, no, and then they're like, oh, I know what we can do. We can do what I call 120% time. Like 100% of the time you're doing what I'm telling you to do, and then on your 20% weekend time, you can do some other projects. Like that's not what we're talking about here. They literally gave people 1 day of the work week to work on things that were not part of their job description. And if you think that's inefficient, I guess technically it is. You have to realize you're leaving money on the table when you work at 100% efficiency. I know this is a huge issue actually for nonprofits. I know you're under pressure to show low admin time, right? You got to have that we have giving it all back to the community. We're a very low percentage of admin and fundraising. But if you don't devote resources to innovation, then expect a flat curve. But if you want innovation, you got to create some space for that. And so maybe you could actually change job descriptions to give maybe some of your employees a percentage of time where they could develop and experiment with brand new ideas. But because if you don't carve out that time, they're not going to do it and you're not going to get the results, right? So again, it doesn't have to be 20%. There's some organizations, I think it's Atlassian in Australia, they do what they used to call FedEx Day. So it's not 20% throughout the year. They would take one day and say, hey, everyone, we're going to take this next day off and then come up with some innovative ideas or experiments to run. I believe they did get a kind but carefully worded letter from FedEx telling them not to use that word because it's kind of trademarked. But so they changed the name. But the whole point was there is a day where we're going to give people time to do this. And so I think you have plenty of options here. You don't have to do the Google 20% time. But I want the nonprofit community particularly to embrace the idea that maybe we're running too lean and maybe we need to give space to the work that can really multiply our success instead of having it be just additive. And so again, those are just a few examples. Like you would want to develop a playbook that goes broader and deeper than that. But your playbook would be designed specifically based on what drives your success. But what I sort of want to close on today is just a little conversation around the bigger picture of this. So figure out what your culture really is and then realize, okay, there are parts of my culture that are misaligned with what drives success. Therefore, I need to develop some plays and run them to become more successful. What I want to remind you is that if you're going to do all that, then you need to embrace this idea of culture management. Back to my point that I think employee engagement is fundamentally a lagging indicator of culture. Then your efforts need to be on culture, which means you need to create like systems and processes and put people's time towards the ongoing management of your culture. And it amazes me that we kind of haven't figured this out. Like financial management is something you do, I assume, in your organization, right? If I ask somebody to give me what's the expense breakdown from last year or what's your projected revenue in the next 3 quarters, whatever it is, you have people and processes and systems. You'd be able to come up with on those. It wouldn't be considered optional, right? You wouldn't come back to me and say, yeah, that financial management piece, we don't really have time for that right now. So no, I can't really help you on that. Yet if I said to you, hey, can you tell me what are the most pressing issues inside your culture? Where's the biggest misalignment with what drives success? Or like, hey, what are your cultural priorities and how are you doing? What progress have you made in the last 3 quarters on addressing those issues? I get blank stares. I get the blinking deer in the headlights look, because we haven't built a system for culture management. And I think the organizations, and this is true actually for any organization, regardless of industry or tax status, frankly. The organizations that choose to embrace culture management and choose to do it with discipline and rigor and focus are going to run circles around everybody else. And one of the reasons here is that the ones that do culture management well are going to end up with like at least 8 or 9 out of 10 of those cylinders firing, okay? The organizations that we studied that were sort of examples of future of the work, sort of positive deviance, they had 100% engagement. You know, they had 2 turnover rates. They had turnover rates that were good turnover, which means you don't get our culture and you need to find a new job, and then bad turnover, which is like, you get it and you're one of those cylinders that's firing, but you decided to move somewhere else. You know, good luck. We love you, but we're sad to see you go. We all need to be at that level, as opposed to sort of desperately trying to get talent and desperately trying to get people and hoping they stay and hoping that they're engaged. I think the organizations that do culture management are going to be ones that get those results. So I leave you with a question, okay? and I'll stay on the line and questions if you've got them. But the question is, what is your role in that? Because I'll tell you right now, this is a little one of those paradoxes. Everyone does have a role in culture management. I almost hate to say that, because if you say culture management is everyone's job, then basically nobody does it. So think for a minute, where you are in the hierarchy, where you are in the organization, what are you going to do to ensure that your culture is being proactively shaped and managed, that you're moving it intentionally in a direction that's going to increase everybody's success in the organization? Because there's something anyone can do. Doesn't matter whether you're at the top or the bottom of the org chart. There are things you can do, experiments you can run, initiatives that you can take, even with limited power, that will start moving the needle on culture and engagement. If there's one thing you leave with a webinar with, it's like an idea of like, you know what, I could do this. Like, do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over. Do we know if we have questions, or because I'm happy to
Hey, how are you doing? Yes, we will wait for some questions. Norman did ask, how are you getting your percentages? I'm not 100% sure when in the presentation. I can't recall.
I would assume at the beginning the sort of 30% disengaged, 20% disengaged, 30% engaged.
Yeah,
those
it would have been toward the beginning.
Yeah, so those come mostly from Gallup, and I gave round numbers because it goes up and down every year by a little bit, but it's been pretty consistently around that. And there may be some other data sources that fold into that, but Gallup is probably the biggest one. They do annual engagement, state of the workplace engagement surveys, and they come in at that level.
Yeah, and it sounded kind of Gallup-y when you were talking about them. Yeah. So
I mean, there are other sources too, but they all and of course, but honestly, they tend to fall around that sort of rough pattern. Like at this point, I don't even know that we need more data because we've sort of figured out how bad it is. Let's stop talking about that and start actually figuring out how to fix it.
Oh no, now we're getting a bunch more of those types of questions. How did you get the innovation ratings that were used in the example?
So that's a culture assessment that we developed, and so we basically ask all the employees in that organization to give their experience on each of those questions, like, hey, how much do I experience this here or not? And so if they experience it a lot, it gets a higher number. If they don't, it gets a lower number. Again, I know everyone always says, well, but the higher numbers are better. I'm like, well, maybe not. But at least gives a snapshot of where you are. Even if you don't use a quantitative assessment on that, though, and I think this is an important point, you should be able to take the concepts, okay? And again, those were our examples. You got to figure out what you want to measure in your organization. Take the concepts, convene a bunch of people, and say, hey, what's it like here around this? And have the conversation. You know what I mean? Like, you can come to as useful a conclusion in a qualitative conversation around it than you can with the data. And in fact, in my opinion, the data should be used not to prove what your culture is, but to drive those conversations. Because culture lives and breathes. It's a human thing. It's a community thing. And so if you're not having conversations about it, I think you're missing the point. And even when we use data, the data is designed to drive the conversation.
Oh, I'm interested in your answer on this too. So in your opinion, how possible is it to overhaul company culture without overhauling senior management?
So you don't have to fire all the management team, for the record. And I have to say that because it's the management team that hires me. Gee whiz, I can't tell them they're all going to go. I will say this: when you are changing culture, okay, culture evolves on its own anyway. Like, culture is always kind of shifting and morphing. That's fine. But when you're doing an intentional shift to your culture, like, hey, we value these things and it's not cutting it, we need to move over here. When you actually move it, I can almost guarantee you people will leave. It's one of my mantras. If you're doing culture change and people aren't leaving, you're doing it wrong. Like, and of course, it's easy for me to say that, right? Because I'm on the outside. But it's not always bad. Like, you have to fire people. It's usually, and I've seen this a lot, when you get really clear on what the new culture is going to be, a bunch of people say, well, that's not what I want. right? Or that's not how I want to be, or that's not the kind of organization I want to work for. That's actually perfect, because then they will decide to not work there anymore. Or I've even had people that take senior managers who realize this is not for them, and they're like, well, let's help you find a new job. And in some cases, it's actually kind of hard because they've been working there a long time. They're not good at networking, or they don't have their resume. Like, they've actually helped send them to conferences, because the goal is to find an opportunity for that person where they personally can be aligned with the work they're doing. Like, I want everybody to be engaged, even if that means you're engaged somewhere else. You know what I mean? So I expect some turnover, but it's more about helping people find an aligned opportunity rather than, okay, you all have to go.
Yeah, and as a culture guy myself, I've seen. Yeah, you're right. If you're making some moves, it's gonna cause some cause some movement in your employees as well. So,
Yeah.
And that's
And that
awesome.
should be fine. I mean, actually,
Yeah.
the side about the first book that Maddie and I wrote was called Humanize. It's from 2011, and one of the lines in there is, we as organizations need to become much more comfortable with separations. Like, we have, and I know there's legal issues involved and it's not easy, but we just, my ideal is we become really good at firing people. Because if we could find a way to do that with less friction, we'd end up with a lot more engagement. I think it would pay off in the long run. So ultimately, I want us to be okay with people leaving. Let's find ways to do it in a supportive way rather than it being kind of traumatic.
Right. Well, hey, thank you so much, Jamie, for your time today. That we're getting things like great session, loved it, and so
Cool.
I did as well. I appreciate it. I'm a culture geek, so I just love hearing perspectives on that.
Yeah.
So,
thank you again for having me.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you so much for your time, and everyone, go out. Please fill out the survey. That helps us help you in the future. And with that, have a great day.